Welcome to Quantum Mind Hub Stories. Before we dive into the story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and remember to share with friends who love a good twist. It helps us bring more stories to you. Alright, let's begin. Eli Winters was that guy who worked his way up from a cramped studio apartment in Seattle to a penthouse overlooking the skyline. At 41, he was a self-made millionaire, the founder of a booming tech startup that got everyone talking at conferences and on social media. He wore tailored suits, drove a sleek European car, and carried himself like a man who had it all figured out. Yet behind those confident strides, there was a lingering sadness in his eyes, an emptiness he couldn't shake off no matter how many deals he closed or how many awards he earned. He often found himself gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his high-rise office at night, wondering why success felt so hollow. He had achieved everything he once dreamt about in his younger years: money, respect, comfort, but something was missing, and he knew exactly what it was: love. Specifically, the love he'd shared with his college sweetheart, Maya. They had met at a campus volunteering event when they were both wide-eyed sophomores. Maya had been standing behind a donation booth, helping raise funds for an animal shelter. Eli approached with a goofy smile, offering to chip in whatever cash he had on him. One conversation sparked another, and before they knew it, they were sharing dinner that same evening, talking until dawn about their dreams, fears, and everything in between. But life pulled them apart after graduation. Eli got a huge break with a Silicon Valley startup that promised him mentorship and stock options. Maya stayed behind in New York to care for her ailing mother. They tried to keep their relationship going long distance, but soon the calls got shorter, the texts less frequent, and eventually there was radio silence. Eli hired a private investigator at one point because he was so worried. Yet even that turned up nothing. Maya had vanished into thin air, leaving him with only questions and regrets. For a while, he thought she might have left him on purpose, or maybe she'd gotten in trouble. The not knowing tortured him, leaving a painful gap in his life no amount of money could fill. People around Eli suspected something had happened to him romantically, but he never opened up about it. Even his closest friends, the ones who had seen him through late-night coding sessions, still only had guesses. They'd notice him staring off into space, phone in hand, scrolling through old pictures as if waiting for one more text from the past. He never deleted Maya's number, though it had been disconnected for years. He clung to the faint hope that one day it might ring and he'd hear her voice. In those lonely nights, he would imagine her saying, "I'm sorry, I was dealing with something huge, but now I'm back," and he would forgive everything in a heartbeat. But that call never came. Instead, he powered through his heartbreak by throwing himself into work. Code became his sanctuary, and building a tech empire felt like the one thing he could control. He was good at it. No matter how sleepless he was or how many heartbreak-fueled coffees he drank, he always delivered brilliant products. Investors saw his brilliance too, and in a few short years, he turned a small startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He partnered with big names, appeared on business magazine covers, and gave keynote speeches that left audiences in awe. But whenever he returned to his penthouse or a fancy hotel suite in another city, he was alone. Eli had a few casual relationships here and there, even tried to settle down once, but those connections felt forced. He wasn't being fair to the women he dated because deep down he was never really available. Maya had taken a piece of him when she vanished, and no amount of success or charm could fill that void. His friends, especially his chief operations officer, Tim, urged him to move on. "You gotta live your life, man," Tim would say, knocking back an espresso. "There are plenty of people out there who'd love you for who you are." Eli would just nod, offering a half-smile. He appreciated Tim's concern, but he also knew no one understood the depth of his bond with Maya. Then, one day, out of the blue, an invitation arrived for him to speak at a tech convention in New York, a chance to go back to the city where it all began. He booked a flight without overthinking. New York had always been bittersweet for him. It was where he and Maya had shared some of their happiest moments. Late-night walks through Central Park, bagel runs in the early morning, study dates at the campus library where they'd whisper jokes to each other until the librarian shot them disapproving glares. The city also housed all his biggest disappointments, especially her disappearance. Still, he said yes to the convention. Maybe part of him hoped he could finally lay the past to rest. When Eli landed at JFK, the memories came flooding back even before his rideshare navigated through the busy streets. He passed by neighborhoods that felt both familiar and foreign, and he couldn't help but wonder if Maya had ever roamed these blocks after she vanished. He looked out the car window at pedestrians hurrying down the sidewalk, scanning faces as if he might spot her in the crowd. It was a silly thought, but old habits die hard. He still carried her face in his mind like a favorite photograph. His hotel was a boutique place in Brooklyn, far from the hustle of Midtown. It had ivy running up the brick walls, a quiet lobby with warm lighting, and a front desk that smelled of freshly brewed tea. The staff recognized him from his public speaking profile and welcomed him with extra courtesy. He did his best to offer friendly smiles but felt too restless to fully engage in pleasantries. After checking in, he planned to retreat to his room, review his notes for the tech convention, and maybe allow himself a quick moment to reminisce about his old life. But before he could head upstairs, the concierge slid an envelope across the counter. "Mr. Winters, this arrived for you just a few hours ago," the clerk said softly. Eli frowned, not expecting any local mail. He opened the envelope and found a single handwritten note. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized the slanted loops and curls of the handwriting. It belonged to Maya. His hands trembled and he had to step away from the front desk to keep it together. The note read, "To Eli Winters. If you're reading this, it means fate still believes in us." Eli's entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. His heart hammered in his chest as he clutched that note. It had been over a decade since he last saw her handwriting. He remembered those lines so well. Maya's letters had always been thoughtful, each word chosen carefully. But this one was short, almost cryptic, and it left him with more questions than answers. How had she known he'd be staying at this hotel? When did she write it? And what did she mean by "fate still believes in us"? He hurried to his room, practically sprinting across the polished floors, ignoring the curious glances from hotel staff. Behind the closed door, he sank onto the edge of the bed and read the note again. It continued with details that made him shiver. She mentioned she'd been in hiding because of a dangerous ex-partner, that she changed her name to stay safe, and that if he was seeing this, it likely meant she was gone. "Passed away from a battle with cancer." Her words were heartbreakingly direct. "I didn't want you to find me only to lose me again. But if you found this letter, maybe you can find some peace by knowing the real story." Eli stared at those lines for a good 10 minutes. Processing every curve of ink on the page. He felt grief, anger, confusion, an entire storm of emotions that he couldn't even begin to name. He had fantasized about reuniting with her so many times, about hearing some wild explanation for why she vanished. But not like this. Not an explanation wrapped in a final goodbye. He wondered if she was truly gone or if this was another misdirection. The letter ended with a curious instruction. "If you still wonder whether love like ours really existed, go to 117 Wilmore Street. Knock, and be kind." Eli's chest tightened. He remembered that address vaguely. It was somewhere in Brooklyn, probably near some of the older neighborhoods. He swallowed the lump in his throat, folded the note carefully, and tucked it inside his wallet like a sacred artifact. Then he picked up his phone, debating whether to call someone. But who could he call about this? He decided to go alone. It was getting late, but the pull to unravel this mystery was stronger than any sense of caution. Before leaving the hotel, he quickly changed into more comfortable clothes. Jeans, a sweater, and sneakers. He texted Tim, letting him know he was in New York and that something urgent came up. Tim replied with a bunch of question marks, but Eli couldn't bring himself to explain. How do you sum up 13 years of heartbreak and a cryptic letter in a text message? He stuck his phone in his pocket and headed out. The cab ride to Wilmore Street was a blur. He stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each pool of light making his heart jump a little. He tried to imagine Maya in that seat next to him, the softness of her hand over his, the gentle laughter she'd spill whenever he told a corny joke. Instead, all he had was the hum of the city and his racing thoughts. The driver dropped him off in front of a modest brownstone building. It looked weathered but welcoming, with flower pots on the stoop and curtains drawn to keep the cold out. The number 117 hung on a small metal plaque by the door, illuminated by a porch light. Eli felt a surge of nerves as he raised his hand to knock. His mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Maya's friend or relative lived here. Maybe Maya herself would open the door, though the letter suggested otherwise. What if it was a trap or a dead end? The door creaked open after a moment, revealing a woman in her late 60s. She had kind, curious eyes and wore a simple, floral-patterned robe. Her graying hair was neatly pinned back, and she looked at him with a gentle recognition, like she'd known him all her life. "Eli Winters?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak. She opened the door wider and motioned for him to come in. "I'm Mrs. Clarice," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "I've been expecting you." The moment Eli stepped inside, the scent of freshly baked bread and lavender assaulted his senses. The living room was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture that made the place feel lived in and warm. Photos lined the walls, some older and black and white, others bright and recent, showing smiling faces Eli didn't recognize. Mrs. Clarice guided him to a worn sofa, urging him to sit. His gaze wandered, trying to piece together how Maya fit into this household. He spotted a framed photo on the mantel of a younger Maya wearing a bright red scarf, standing next to Mrs. Clarice. She looked happy, radiant. Mrs. Clarice caught his glance. "That was taken about 10 years ago," she explained, settling into an armchair across from him. "Back when Maya first came to me." Eli felt his throat tighten at the name, hearing it spoken after all these years. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "Is she?" he began, but he couldn't finish the question. "She's gone," Mrs. Clarice confirmed, her eyes moistening with tears. "Passed away 2 months ago. I'm sorry you had to find out like this." Eli leaned back into the sofa, feeling a knot of grief welling up inside him. Part of him had clung to the hope that the letter was just a cruel joke or a misunderstanding. Now it all came crashing down. The finality of her death, the end of any chance to see her again, to ask her why she left, to hold her hand just one more time. He blinked back tears, his voice shaky. "She wrote me a letter. Told me to come here," he said. I don't understand why." Mrs. Clarice offered a sad, understanding nod. "Maya had a lot of secrets in her last few years," she said. "She was trying to protect you in her own way. But there's something you need to see." She gestured toward a hallway leading to the back of the house. Before Eli could say anything more, he heard the patter of small footsteps. A moment later, 3 children appeared. A boy around 10, a girl around 7, and another boy about 5. They peeked at Eli from behind Mrs. Clarice's chair, their eyes wide with cautious curiosity. Eli's heart pounded as he looked at the kids, uncertain how they fit into the story. He assumed they might be Mrs. Clarice's grandchildren or foster kids. But before he could even attempt a polite greeting, the oldest boy stepped forward, eyes locked on Eli, and asked the question that would change his life. "Are you our daddy?" The words dropped like a ton of bricks, and Eli felt his mind swirl. Daddy? That couldn't be right. He looked from the boy's earnest face to Mrs. Clarice, who was watching him with a fragile expression. For a few seconds, Eli was speechless. The middle child, a girl with pigtails, whispered to her brother, "See, I told you he looks like the guy in Mom's photo." The youngest clung to the girl's arm, eyes darting between Eli and the floor. Eli tried to catch his breath, his voice coming out in a ragged whisper, I don't understand." Mrs. Clarice cleared her throat gently. "Kids, why don't you head upstairs for a bit? I need to talk to Mr. Winters." The children nodded and trudged away, casting curious glances over their shoulders. Once they were out of earshot, Mrs. Clarice folded her hands in her lap. "I suppose I should explain. Maya had 3 children. Their names are Luca, Mila, and Levi," she said, pausing as if to let each name sink in. "But they're not yours biologically." Eli exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. A strange mix of relief and confusion washed over him. "Then why would they think I'm their dad?" Mrs. Clarice's eyes dropped to her folded hands. "Because Maya told them you were. She always spoke of you as the greatest man she'd ever known, the only one who truly loved her without conditions. When she got ill and realized she wouldn't make it, she wanted them to have someone to believe in. She wanted them to believe their father was someone kind, someone who would protect them. In her last weeks, she wrote them a letter, explaining that if you ever showed up, they'd know you were the one she loved with all her heart." Eli felt tears welling up, unable to hold back the emotional force hitting him from all sides. Anger, sadness, and a fierce protectiveness tangled inside him. "I don't understand," he repeated. But this time it came out as a broken plea. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she reach out when she got pregnant? If not by me, then by who? And why lie to the children about me? Mrs. Clarice took a slow, measured breath, then leaned forward, resting a comforting hand on Eli's knee. "It's complicated," she admitted. "Maya was in a relationship with someone abusive. He was the children's biological father, but he wasn't safe for them. When she finally escaped, she came to me. And she was still in love with you, Eli. She talked about you every day, about how you were her ray of hope back in college." He remembered how kind Maya was, how she used to volunteer at shelters and stay up all night helping him study. She never deserved to be in an abusive relationship. The thought of her suffering through that alone made his stomach turn. "She was scared," Mrs. Clarice continued, "scared that if she brought you back into her life, her ex might come after you both. She changed her name, uprooted herself, and tried to keep the kids safe. She thought you'd be better off without the burden of her troubles." Eli wiped at his cheek, his voice tight. "But the kids?" "She let them believe I'm their father." He paused, unsure how to describe this feeling, equal parts heartbreak and awe. "She told them stories about who you used to be, how you were bright, kind, and how you had this unstoppable drive to make the world better," said Mrs. Clarice. "In her mind, you'd eventually show up. She believed in fate, I guess." Eli nodded slowly. Maya was always the romantic, always believing in destiny and second chances. Still, he couldn't wrap his head around the enormity of it all. He had just walked into a house filled with children who thought he was dad. He wasn't prepared for fatherhood, let alone a fatherhood born from someone else's heartbreak. The evening stretched on as Mrs. Clarice poured them both cups of chamomile tea. Eli sipped the warm drink mechanically, his mind spinning. He kept looking down the hallway where the kids had disappeared, imagining their little faces. His life had just flipped upside down in the span of an hour. One part of him felt a strange, profound connection to these kids simply because Maya had tied them to him. Another part felt overwhelmed. This wasn't something he could walk away from without feeling like he was betraying Maya's memory. Mrs. Clarice started to share bits of Maya's story, filling in the gaps left by the letter. After Maya fled the abusive relationship, she moved across different boroughs, taking on odd jobs under false names to evade her ex. When she found out she had cancer, it was already stage 4. There was little the doctors could do except make her comfortable. During those final months, she asked Mrs. Clarice to let the children believe Eli was their real father, someone heroic. She had no photos of their biological dad. She refused to let them keep any memory of him. Instead, she showed them the old pictures of her and Eli from college, weaving stories of their love as if it continued uninterrupted. First, Mrs. Clarice objected, thinking it would only confuse the kids, but Maya insisted. She said that if Eli ever found out, he'd at least understand the reasons behind her lie. She believed he'd have a bigger heart than anyone else in the world. Eli wasn't sure if he could live up to that image, but he felt an enormous pull to honor her faith in him. "What happens now?" he finally asked, looking up at Mrs. Clarice. She sighed, a weight on her shoulders. "I'm old, Eli. My health isn't the best. I can't look after 3 growing children forever. Maya hoped that if you found us, you might at least consider being in their lives." Eli set his cup down, his heart pounding. The idea of fatherhood had always seemed like a distant concept, something for one day. Suddenly, that one day was staring him right in the face. Before he answered, the kids came peeking around the corner, too curious to stay hidden. Luca, the oldest, spoke up again, braver this time. "Do you remember Mom?" he asked. "She always talked about how you once won a robot building contest in college. She said you were the smartest person in the world." Eli felt a little smile tug at his lips. He did remember that contest. Maya had been there, cheering him on from the front row as he showcased a clunky little robot that could pick up cups and place them on a tray. "I remember," Eli said gently. "Your mom was probably giving me too much credit, though." Mila, the middle child, bit her lip and stepped forward. "Mom said you liked drawing pictures of buildings and machines when you were a kid," she added, looking down at the sketchbook in her hand. "I like drawing butterflies." She flipped open the book to show him a colorful array of butterflies. They weren't perfect, but they showed creativity, like they had little mechanical wings and gears for bodies. Eli chuckled softly, warmth spreading through his chest. "That's really cool," he told her, leaning in to admire the drawings. I used to draw all sorts of inventions in my notebook. Levi, the youngest, still stood at the back, holding on to the banister. He fiddled with a small toy car, rolling it between his hands. He hadn't said a word. Slowly, Eli extended a hand and gave the boy a small wave. Levi just stared, his dark eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Eli understood that look. It was the look of a child who was trying to figure out if the stranger in front of him was friend or foe. Eli's chest felt tight, overwhelmed by unexpected affection. He never thought he'd be standing in a living room with 3 kids looking up at him as if he held the answers to their world. Everything in him wanted to run, to say he wasn't ready. But the ghost of Maya's faith in him hovered over his shoulder, whispering that he could be the good man she believed in. "I don't have all the answers right now," Eli finally told Mrs. Clarice, gently placing a hand on Luca's shoulder. "But I'm not going to walk away." A small smile crossed the older woman's face, and the children's eyes lit up with cautious hope. Luca quickly hid his excitement behind a neutral expression. He was the older brother, trying to be brave. Mila grinned openly, and Levi gave a half-smile that tugged at Eli's heart. That night, Eli stayed for dinner, a simple meal of homemade soup and bread. The kids chattered about school projects and weekend cartoons, peppering him with questions about his job and the gadgets he made. Eli tried to answer without sounding too techy. He found himself relaxing, laughing even, as he explained how a new phone app he was developing worked. In those moments, the tension of being labeled Dad lessened just enough for him to see the sweetness of the strange, unexpected bond. After dinner, he helped Mrs. Clarice clean up the kitchen, feeling the normalcy of domestic tasks. There was something oddly comforting about washing dishes beside a grandmotherly figure who had so many stories to tell about Maya's final days. She spoke about how Maya grew quieter towards the end, but her eyes would always light up when she mentioned Eli. She showed him a few more photos, Maya holding Luca as a newborn, Maya beaming with pride when Mila started kindergarten, Maya cradling a sick Levi at the hospital. Eli felt both pain and gratitude, wishing he could have been part of those milestones, yet thankful Maya found the courage to live for her kids in those tough years. When the dishes were done, he realized it was getting late. He still had a keynote speech to deliver the next morning, but that felt trivial now. He walked to the front door with Mrs. Clarice, who handed him a slip of paper with her phone number. "Call me if you want to see the kids," she said kindly. "They need stability, but I won't force you into anything." Eli nodded, pockets stuffed with too many complicated feelings. As he left, the kids ran downstairs to wave goodbye, their faces a mashup of hope, worry, and longing. Back at the hotel, Eli hardly slept. He tossed and turned, mind racing through every possible scenario of how his life could unfold now. Part of him questioned if he was signing up for something impossible. Another part remembered the gentle way the kids looked at him, and how Maya had believed in him so strongly. He knew he couldn't just pretend this never happened. The next morning, he went through the motions of putting on his suit, grabbing a quick coffee, and making his way to the tech convention. The auditorium was packed, and the conference organizers were thrilled to have a well-known speaker like Eli on the agenda. During his keynote, he talked about emerging AI trends, data security, and all the usual topics people expected from a tech mogul. But his heart wasn't in it. He glanced at the crowd, noticing how everyone was scribbling notes or filming him on their phones, but all he could think about was 117, Wilmore Street, and the 3 kids who believed he was their father. It felt surreal giving a futuristic presentation while his personal life was spinning into a new orbit. After the talk, reporters hounded him for interviews, but he politely declined. He needed time to think. He slipped out a side entrance and found himself wandering the streets, heading into a small coffee shop he and Maya once visited back in their college days. It was still there, though the decor had changed. He ordered a latte and found a quiet corner seat, letting the familiar aroma trigger fond memories. He could almost see Maya's laughter bouncing off the walls, recall how her eyes crinkled when he told a bad joke. A part of him wished he could go back in time and grab every precious moment that slipped away. Sipping his drink, he pulled out his phone and stared at Mrs. Clarice's number. Should he call? Should he schedule a meeting with a lawyer first? He felt a bit lost. But the more he hesitated, the more it felt wrong. The kids needed him, or at least needed someone. So he made the decision. He dialed the number. Mrs. Clarice picked up on the second ring, her voice calm yet tinged with anticipation. Eli cleared his throat, which suddenly felt tight. "Can I come by tonight?" he asked. She sounded relieved. "Of course," she replied. "They'll be happy to see you." He spent the rest of the day in a daze, checking emails and responding to urgent business matters without really focusing. Around dusk, he hopped in a cab and went straight to Wilmore Street. This time, there was less apprehension and more purpose in his stride. He knocked, and the door swung open to reveal Luca, who was wearing pajamas with rocket ships on them. "Hi," the boy said, a little shy. "We saved you some dinner if you're hungry." Eli felt his heart clench at the boy's thoughtfulness. "Thanks, Luca," he said softly, stepping inside. Mila and Levi were in the living room playing with building blocks, trying to create some elaborate castle. Mila looked up with a bright grin, and Levi raised his hand in a timid wave. Mrs. Clarice emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I was just heating up some leftovers," she said. "We weren't sure you'd make it." Eli nodded, taking off his coat. "I'm here," he said simply, unsure how else to put it. Over dinner, he got to know the kids better. Luca loved tinkering with electronics. He showed Eli a small circuit board he'd salvaged from a broken radio. Mila chatted nonstop about her art projects and told him she drew a picture of him at school that day. Levi quietly listened, occasionally offering a comment about his favorite cartoons. Each little detail made Eli's heart swell with a feeling he'd never known before. He realized that, biologically or not, these kids were an extension of Maya's love. She'd raised them with stories about him. Could he just walk away now, leaving them fatherless again? When dinner was over, he helped them with their homework, Luca with some tricky math problems, Mila with reading comprehension, and Levi practiced his letters. It felt foreign but also right, like stepping into a long-lost role he never knew he wanted. As the evening wore on, Eli pulled Mrs. Clarice aside for a more serious conversation. They sat around the kitchen table, the kids busy in the living room. He told her he felt a strong responsibility to be there for them, but he worried he might not measure up to what Maya promised. "I'm not a perfect guy," he admitted. "I have a demanding job in Seattle. My life is complicated, but I also can't just turn my back on them." Mrs. Clarice listened, nodding sympathetically. "Maya never wanted perfection," she said gently. "She only wanted them to know a love that was pure and safe. She figured you'd at least give them that. If you choose to be in their lives, I'm sure you'll figure out the details." They discussed practical issues like where the kids would live, schooling, and financial support. Eli had the resources to ensure they'd never want for anything. But more than money, these children needed a stable parent figure. At one point, he noticed a letter stuck to the refrigerator door, the edges worn from being moved around. It was another note from Maya, her handwriting clear. "For the kids. Believe in love. It's stronger than fear. Mom." Eli felt tears prickling the corners of his eyes. Her presence seemed to fill every corner of this home, and he realized Maya had never stopped loving him or believing in their story, no matter how life had pulled them apart. He told Mrs. Clarice he'd like to spend more time with them over the next few days, see how they all fit together, and then maybe talk to a lawyer about custody or guardianship options. She agreed. Her relief was almost palpable. Caring for 3 kids at her age was no easy task. As they finished their conversation, Eli glanced into the living room. The children had fallen asleep in front of the TV, their small bodies sprawled across cushions. Something inside him melted. He gently scooped Levi into his arms and carried him upstairs, placing him on his bed while Mrs. Clarice tucked in Luca and Mila. Over the next few days, Eli's scheduled conference events suddenly felt like background noise. He still attended meetings and luncheons, but his mind was always on 117 Wilmore Street. Each evening, he'd show up, helping Mrs. Clarice with the kids' routines, dinner, homework, bedtime stories. The children warmed up to him fast, especially once they realized he genuinely cared. Luca began proudly showing Eli the tech projects he'd cobbled together from junkyard parts. Mila brought him endless drawings, each one featuring him, her, and her brothers in some fantastical setting, flying in space suits or sailing a pirate ship. Little Levi still took his time, but each night he inched closer, crawling into Eli's lap during story time without saying a word. Every time Eli looked at them, he felt Maya's echo, a wave of love mixed with the sting of loss. He found himself dreaming about her at night, recalling the moments when they were just young college students with no clue how messy life could get. In his dreams, she'd smile, placing a soft hand on his cheek, as if to say, "Thank you for being there for them." But as the days passed, another emotion bubbled under Eli's skin, anger at the circumstances. He hated that Maya had to live in fear, that she battled cancer alone, that some abusive man existed in this story at all. Questions about that man tormented him. Where was he now? Was he still a threat? Every so often, he'd discuss the matter with Mrs. Clarice, who simply said, "He's out of the picture as far as we know." That didn't soothe Eli's simmering rage, but he tried to focus on what he could control. The kids started calling him Eli instead of Dad, which, oddly, stung a little. He knew they were confused, but they were also adjusting to the real person behind the legendary dad figure Maya had described. Eli tried to be patient. He'd explain to them, "I don't want to replace your memories of your mom, but I do want to be here for you." The kids just nodded, taking it day by day. One evening after dinner, Luca approached Eli with a serious look on his face. "Can I show you something?" he asked quietly. Eli nodded, following him up to his small bedroom. Luca rummaged under his bed and pulled out a tattered notebook stuffed with papers and doodles. "These are designs for a video game I want to make one day," he explained, flipping through pages filled with sketches of characters, level layouts, and bits of story. Eli felt a surge of pride. "Wow, you've got a whole world in here," he said, smiling. Luca smiled back, but then his face fell a little. "Mom always said you'd help me make it real." That was one of those moments that hit Eli right in the gut. Maya had promised them a father who could turn dreams into reality. He gently patted Luca's shoulder. "Let's work on it together sometime," he offered. Luca's eyes sparkled. "Really?" Eli nodded. "Really." That same night, Mila cornered him while he was helping fold laundry. She showed him a series of butterfly drawings that were more detailed than before, with mechanical parts and futuristic touches. "I call them cyber butterflies," she declared proudly. "They represent hope because they can fly away from bad things." Eli carefully admired her artwork. "You've got real talent," he said softly. Mila beamed, hugging her sketchbook to her chest. Then, as bedtime approached, Levi approached him with a small stuffed lion clutched in his hands. He extended it to Eli wordlessly. Eli took the lion, not sure what to do. Mrs. Clarice, standing nearby, murmured that was his favorite toy. "Maybe he wants you to keep it for the night." Carefully, Eli handed it back. "How about we share it?" he suggested. Levi nodded slowly, letting Eli tuck the lion between the two of them during a short reading session. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, like Levi was finally allowing Eli into his circle of trust. At the end of the night, when the kids were asleep, Mrs. Clarice found Eli sipping tea in the quiet living room. "You're doing well," she whispered. "They're opening up to you." Eli felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that they trusted him, fear that he might still let them down. As the tech convention drew to a close, Eli felt the weight of a decision pressing down on him. He was due to fly back to Seattle, but everything in him said he couldn't just walk away. His new father figure role, unofficial as it was, had become more important than his corporate obligations. He started making calls to rearrange his schedule, pushing back board meetings and delegating tasks to Tim and the rest of his leadership team. Tim was confused at first, but Eli eventually told him a simplified version of events. He'd found out about 3 kids Maya had left behind, and he felt responsible for them. Tim was shocked but supported his decision. "Do what you gotta do," he said. "We'll keep the business running." Still, Eli wasn't sure if New York was the right place to raise them, especially with Mrs. Clarice's failing health. On top of that, the cost of living was high, and he worried about the dangerous environment that might still linger from their father's side of the story. But uprooting 3 kids from the only city they'd ever known seemed drastic, too. He spent hours talking with Mrs. Clarice about options. Maybe they could move to a quieter suburb near Seattle, or perhaps he could move part of his operations to New York. The details got tangled, but one thing was clear: he wanted to formally become their guardian. Late one night, after tucking the kids in, Eli sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, trying to outline a plan. He listed pros and cons, possible schools, real estate options, and a million other details. Mrs. Clarice patted his shoulder. "You don't have to solve everything tonight," she said softly. "Just do right by them. That's what Maya would want." He paused, pen hovering over the paper. A thought sparked. "Did Maya have a will or any legal documents?" he asked. Mrs. Clarice frowned. "Not much. She died with very little. But she wrote a letter addressed to both you and the kids. I've kept it, waiting for the right moment." Eli felt a jolt of anticipation. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice quiet but urgent. Mrs. Clarice fetched a small wooden box from a hidden spot in the hallway closet. The box had a simple latch, and inside were a few precious items: Maya's wedding band from her previous relationship, an object she kept for reasons unclear, a small family photo of her mother and father, and a sealed envelope with Eli and the kids written across it in elegant cursive. With trembling fingers, Eli opened the envelope. The letter was dated about a month before Maya died. The handwriting was shaky but still recognizable. It began with an apology for the pain she caused by disappearing, explaining how she felt she had no choice because of the danger surrounding her. She asked for forgiveness, hoping Eli would understand that she never stopped loving him. Then the letter shifted focus to the children, praising their unique talents and sweethearts. She wrote about how each of them reminded her of the love she once shared with Eli, her sense of wonder, her hope for the future, her belief in kindness. Even though they weren't his by blood, she felt their connection transcended biology. "If you're reading this, I'm no longer here to explain things in person," the letter concluded. "But please believe me, I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to protect you. If you choose to be in their lives, give them the warmth, safety, and love I couldn't manage on my own. Let them know that the world can be beautiful and that their mother loved them too much to subject them to more danger. Eli, if I ever meant anything to you, please take care of my babies. They deserve a chance at happiness. And you, my dear, deserve to love again." Tears blurred Eli's vision as he finished reading. He folded the letter back into the envelope, then held it against his chest, feeling the full weight of her final wish. Mrs. Clarice placed a hand on his shoulder, both of them quietly grieving a woman who had been strong enough to endure so much. In that moment, Eli made his decision. He would step up no matter how scared he felt, but fate often has a way of throwing in extra complications. A week later, as Eli was finalizing legal papers to become the children's guardian, a letter arrived at Mrs. Clarice's house. It was from a lawyer representing the father of the children, a name Eli barely recognized but understood to be the abusive ex Maya had fled from. The letter stated that the man wanted his paternal rights recognized and was challenging any guardianship arrangement that excluded him. Eli's blood ran cold as he read the formal, impersonal words. He couldn't believe it. This was the man who hurt Maya, and now he wanted to step back into the kids' lives? Eli immediately contacted the best family law attorney he could find. They met in a small Brooklyn office, the lawyer flipping through the documents with a grim expression. "If he's the biological father, he does have certain rights, unless there's a record of abuse or a restraining order," the lawyer explained. Eli's jaw clenched. He knew Maya had never pressed charges against the man. She'd been too scared. There was no official documentation of the abuse, which meant a complicated legal battle might be ahead. It felt like a direct assault on Maya's dying wish, an insult to everything she endured. He called Tim and asked for help locating any evidence that could prove the ex was unfit as a father, old hospital records, eyewitnesses, anything that might show a pattern of abuse. At the same time, he started discussing with Mrs. Clarice how they could keep the children safe from this man. The idea of him waltzing back into their lives made Eli's stomach turn. He worried the kids might end up confused or even traumatized. Luca, Mila, and Levi had just begun to trust Eli, and the thought of them being ripped away from this new sense of security was unthinkable. That night, Luca found him pacing the living room after the younger ones had gone to bed. "Is something wrong?" the boy asked quietly. Eli forced a reassuring smile. "Just grown-up stuff," he replied. But Luca looked unconvinced. "Are you leaving us?" he whispered, eyes wide with dread. Eli felt his heart break a little. "No, buddy," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Determined to protect the children, Eli and his lawyer worked tirelessly. They enlisted a private investigator to track down any records of police visits or emergency room admissions from Maya's time with that man. They also started building a financial and emotional case for why Eli was the better guardian. He had resources, a stable home, even if it was across the country, and genuine affection for the children. Meanwhile, the man's lawyer was aggressive, sending demands and thinly veiled threats. It seemed like the ex was trying to intimidate them into backing down. At one point, tension spiked when a suspicious figure was spotted outside Mrs. Clarice's house, lurking in a dark sedan. When Eli confronted the driver, the car sped off, leaving them rattled but more determined. Eli began to think about relocating Mrs. Clarice and the children to a safer area, at least temporarily. She hesitated, worried about uprooting the kids. But in the end, safety came first. Emotionally, the children sensed something was off. Mila started having nightmares, waking up crying about a scary man who wanted to take them away. Levi clung to his stuffed lion even during the day, refusing to let go. Luca became more guarded, snapping at Eli over small things, then apologizing with tears in his eyes. Eli did his best to reassure them, but he felt helpless in the face of a legal system that could easily fail them. Every time he saw the heartbreak in their eyes, he remembered Maya's final plea. Desperate for evidence to build their case, the investigator finally struck gold: old medical records from a clinic that showed Maya had bruised ribs and a fracture, along with a confidential statement hinting at domestic violence. While it wasn't an outright admission, it was enough to suggest a pattern of abuse. With these documents in hand, Eli's lawyer felt more confident about blocking the ex's parental claim. They filed motions in court demanding the man undergo psychological evaluations and that the children's testimonies be heard under professional guidance. As the court date approached, Eli tried to keep the kids out of the loop as much as possible, but they weren't naive. They knew their future was on the line. Court day dawned under a gray New York sky. Rain pattered against the courthouse windows as Eli, Mrs. Clarice, and the children's appointed social worker navigated the sterile hallways. Luca, Mila, and Levi stayed at home with a trusted neighbor for the initial hearing to avoid stress. Eli's palms felt clammy. He was used to boardrooms and high-stakes business deals, but this was different. This was about the fate of 3 innocent kids who had already been through too much. The ex arrived with a smug grin and a flashy lawyer. He was tall, with a hardened face, and he shot Eli a venomous look that made his blood boil. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, began the session by reviewing documents and statements. Eli's lawyer presented the medical records and a statement from a counselor who had interviewed the kids, indicating they had serious fears tied to memories of yelling and violence. As the ex's lawyer tried to dismiss the evidence, painting Maya as unstable, Eli struggled to keep his anger in check. He wanted to stand up and shout that Maya was the bravest woman he ever knew, but he had to trust his lawyer's strategy. The judge asked pointed questions, challenging the ex on why he never paid child support and why he waited this long to assert his paternal rights. The ex stammered, citing ignorance, but it was clear he had a shady history. After hours of heated back and forth, the judge decided there was enough concern to grant a temporary restraining order against the ex, preventing him from contacting the children. She also scheduled a thorough investigation by social services. Though nothing was final, it felt like a small victory. Eli could breathe a bit easier knowing the immediate threat was halted, at least for now. He walked out of the courthouse exhausted but relieved. When he got home, the kids bombarded him with questions. "Is it over?" Mila asked, eyes full of hope. "Are you still our Eli?" Levi whimpered, clinging to his shirt. Luca hung back, face set in a tense scowl, as if preparing for the worst. Eli forced a smile. "We won a battle today," he said gently, "but we still have to see what happens next." Over the following weeks, social workers interviewed the kids and they spent time with Eli to observe the bond forming between them. Despite the bizarre circumstances, Eli not being their biological father, there was a clear emotional connection. The children lit up whenever he was around, especially when he talked about future plans or even silly things like trying out a new pizza place. Social workers took note of how naturally the kids gravitated to him, how comfortable they were showing him their drawings or confiding in him about school drama. Meanwhile, the ex's attempts to discredit Eli fell flat. He had no evidence linking Eli to any wrongdoing. If anything, the man's own background was riddled with red flags, an unstable job history, a few run-ins with the law, and no sign he ever tried to be a stable parent. Eli's lawyer remained vigilant, reminding him that legal battles could flip in an instant. But with each passing day, the case seemed to lean more in favor of granting Eli permanent guardianship, provided he could prove a stable home. That stability question turned into a new dilemma. Should he move them to Seattle? or stay in New York to avoid uprooting their lives further. A part of him liked the idea of returning to Seattle and introducing them to the life he'd built, his modern penthouse, the tech empire, the supportive community of friends. Another part recognized that New York was the only home the kids had ever known. They had friends, a routine, and a history here. He floated the idea to Luca first, curious how the older boy felt. "Seattle? That's where your company is, right?" Luca asked. "I saw it on the news. It looks cool." But when Eli mentioned the possibility of moving there, Luca shrugged uncertainly. "I dunno. I'd miss my friends." The conversation with Mila and Levi was similar: excitement about new adventures, sadness about leaving behind the familiar. Eli realized that no matter what he chose, sacrifices would be made. He planned to talk it through with all three kids, wanting their input. If he was going to be their father figure, they deserved a voice in where they called home. On a brisk Saturday afternoon, Eli took the kids to a nearby park. They sat together on a worn picnic bench, eating ice cream sundaes from the park's small cafe. Swirls of chocolate smeared on Levi's face, while Mila carefully licked every drop that threatened to spill. Luca finished as quickly, already eyeing the playground. "We need to talk," Eli began, feeling slightly nervous. He tried to keep his voice steady and casual, but the children sensed something important was coming. "I have to go back to Seattle soon," he continued. "That's where my work and house are. But I don't want to leave you guys behind. So I'd like to know how you'd feel about moving out there with me." The children exchanged glances. Mila's eyebrows furrowed. "But what about school?" she asked. "And Grandma Clarice?" Luca chimed in. "I've never even been on an airplane." "Well, maybe once when I was really little." Levi clutched his spoon tightly, quiet as always. Eli gently ruffled the boy's hair, wanting to include him. "We'd find a good school for you guys, and maybe Mrs. Clarice could come with us or visit whenever she wants," he explained. Looking at the older woman who sat nearby on a bench, reading, she caught his glance and gave a supportive nod. While she wasn't thrilled about leaving her home, she told Eli privately she'd do whatever was best for the kids. "I like Seattle, well, from what I've seen on TV," Luca admitted. "But I'm scared of leaving my friends." Eli nodded, understanding the concern. "We can visit them and you can make new ones," he replied gently. "Change can be scary, but sometimes it leads to good things." Mila looked at the sky, as if searching for an answer. Then she exhaled, turning to her brothers. "Mom always said we'd follow your lead if you ever showed up," she murmured, almost as if speaking to Maya. Luca shrugged, trying to look brave, and Levi nodded, hugging his lion. So they decided, in a quiet circle of acceptance, that they'd give Seattle a chance. They'd start fresh, carrying Maya's memory with them. It wasn't a decision made without tears or second thoughts, but it felt like the right step forward for all of them. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted into high gear. Eli's attorney finalized the guardianship paperwork, and after a thorough review, the family court granted him the right to take the children into his care. The judge commended him for stepping up, especially since he wasn't the biological father. The ex tried one last stunt, showing up in court with fake affidavits claiming he had turned his life around. But the judge saw right through the deceit. Ultimately, he was denied custody and given limited, supervised visitation rights, pending further evaluation. He cursed under his breath, shooting Eli a look of pure hatred as the gavel banged. But Eli didn't care. The children were safe, and Maya's dying wish was being honored. With legal approval secured, Eli threw himself into moving logistics. He rented a larger place in Seattle, thinking a penthouse might not be the most child-friendly environment. Instead, he found a spacious home in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard and enough rooms for everyone. He even made sure there was a small studio area for Mila's art, a workshop space for Luca's tinkering, and a cozy corner for Levi to keep his stuffed lion close by. Mrs. Clarice decided she would come along, at least for the first few months, to help with the transition. She packed her belongings into boxes, bidding farewell to her Brooklyn friends with a heavy heart. The kids said their emotional goodbyes to classmates, teachers, and neighbors. They cried, laughed, and promised to keep in touch. Eli stood by, reassuring them they could visit during holidays, that New York wasn't disappearing, it was just changing from home base to a beloved memory. On the day of the big move, they all boarded a flight to Seattle. Luca was jittery with excitement, peering out the window at the clouds. Mila clung to her sketchbook, scribbling pictures of them flying through the air. Levi held onto Eli's hand the entire time, whispering, "I'm a little scared." Eli squeezed back, warmth surging in his chest. "It's okay," he whispered, "I'm right here." Part of him felt like Maya was there too, smiling at how they were finally united, forging a path she'd always believed was possible. Their arrival in Seattle was both thrilling and overwhelming. Eli's new home stood on a quiet, tree-lined street, far from the noise of downtown. The house had a wide front porch, a spacious living room, and bedrooms that overlooked a scenic view of distant hills. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled with each child's name or the room it belonged to. Mrs. Clarice fussed over the kitchen, arranging spices and dishes as if she'd always lived there. For the first few days, the kids wandered around, exploring every nook. Luca was amazed by the workshop area Eli had set up. He immediately laid out his circuit boards and half-finished game sketches. Mila declared the sunlit dining room her art studio, taping butterfly drawings to the walls. Levi found comfort in the backyard, where he discovered a shady spot under a big oak tree, perfect for lying on a blanket with his stuffed lion and daydreaming. Eli, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of pride and fear. He had all the space, all these resources, but could he really handle fatherhood day in and day out? They decided to take it one step at a time. In the mornings, Mrs. Clarice helped with breakfast, pancakes, scrambled eggs, or oatmeal, depending on the children's whims. Then Eli would drive them to a local school he'd researched carefully. On the way, they'd joke about new teachers, new cafeteria food, and new friends. He'd drop them off, heading to his office for a few hours of meetings. But his mind never strayed far from wondering how they were settling in. Luca joined a robotics club after school, his eyes lighting up as he got to program small robots to navigate mazes. Mila signed up for an art class, bringing home sculptures and paintings that Eli proudly displayed on the walls. Levi, quieter, joined a little reading group, and soon enough, he was excitedly telling Eli about the new stories he'd discovered. Evenings became a family affair, dinner around the table, homework sessions in the living room, and the occasional movie night with popcorn. It wasn't perfect. They had tantrums and misunderstandings, but there was also laughter, warmth, and a sense that they were building something real. Time slipped by in a blur of school days, soccer practices, and late-night coding sessions for Eli's business. The kids settled into the neighborhood, making new friends and learning to call Seattle home. In quieter moments, Eli would pull out Maya's letter, reading her words again, sometimes tearing up at how everything was finally falling into place. He even set up a small memorial corner in the living room, a photo of Maya, a candle, and some flowers. The children placed little tokens there, Mila's drawing of butterflies, Luca's small robot piece, Levi's stuffed lion for a single night, though he took it back by morning. One afternoon, Eli's friend Tim visited from out of town. He brought gifts for the kids, a fancy art kit for Mila, a robotics set for Luca, and a soft plush cat for Levi. Tim pulled Eli aside at one point, eyeing him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "Dude, this is wild," he said, looking around at the cozy chaos. "Last time I saw you, you were living the single, workaholic life. Now you've got a house full of kids and you seem happy." Eli sighed, a gentle smile on his face. "It's complicated, but it feels right," he admitted. "I never thought I'd get closure about Maya, let alone become a dad to her kids that aren't even mine biologically. But every morning I wake up knowing I've got a real reason to be better." Tim clapped him on the shoulder. "Proud of you, man. This is next-level adulting." Of course, fatherhood came with its struggles. Sometimes Luca would lash out, complaining about chores or skipping his homework. Mila threw a fit when she couldn't get her paint colors right. Levi had occasional nightmares, waking up crying for his mom. Eli navigated each hurdle with patience he never knew he had. When he felt overwhelmed, he'd remember Maya's love, the promise he made to her. That memory gave him the strength to keep going, to soothe tears, mediate sibling fights, and carve out time to be fully present. With each passing day, the children began calling him Dad more often, especially Mila, who seemed determined to embrace the new family dynamic. Luca wavered between Dad and Eli, and Levi shyly whispered it now and then. It was music to Eli's ears. About 6 months into their new life in Seattle, a surprise visitor arrived, the ex's lawyer. He showed up unannounced at Eli's office, requesting a private meeting. Eli's stomach sank, worried the man might be planning another custody challenge. But to Eli's shock, the lawyer said his client had moved on and was offering to terminate his parental rights entirely in exchange for a one-time settlement. Eli bristled at the idea of paying off an abuser, but his lawyer calmly pointed out that it might be the cleanest way to sever any lingering legal ties. If the ex was out of the picture permanently, the children wouldn't have to live with the fear of him popping up again. After a few days of thought and a serious conversation with Mrs. Clarice, Eli agreed. He wired the settlement under strict legal terms that prevented the ex from ever making contact with the children again. It felt dirty but also liberating, like buying their freedom from a ghost of the past. Once the paperwork was signed, a huge weight lifted off Eli's chest. No more threats or overshadowing fear. The children's future was legally secured. To celebrate, Eli took the kids on a weekend trip to the mountains. They stayed in a cozy cabin surrounded by towering pine trees and crisp, cool air. It was the first real vacation they'd had as a family. They roasted marshmallows by the fire, told spooky stories, and hiked along scenic trails with breathtaking views. Mila filled her sketchbook with scenic waterfalls and forest animals, Luca collected small stones to potentially use in some robotics project, and Levi gripped Eli's hand through the steep parts of the hike, trusting him completely. One night, as they sat around the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa, Luca turned to Eli. "I guess you really are our dad now, huh?" His voice was soft, but there was a note of contentment. Eli felt tears sting his eyes. "I guess so," he responded, ruffling Luca's hair. Mila leaned her head on his shoulder, and Levi curled up in his lap, hugging that stuffed lion. In that quiet moment, with the crackling of burning wood, Eli felt a peace he had never known before. Returning to everyday life, things found a new normal. The children thrived in school, forging friendships and discovering hobbies they might never have explored otherwise. Eli's work life adapted. He delegated more, trusting his team to handle day-to-day operations so he could attend parent-teacher conferences and school plays. Surprisingly, the company didn't suffer. It grew even stronger as Eli's managers stepped up with new ideas and leadership styles. He realized that not being a control freak allowed him to see his team's talents shine. Occasionally, the kids would ask about their mom. Luca wanted to know how Eli and Maya fell in love. Mila wondered about Maya's favorite color, her favorite foods. Levi asked if she'd be proud of him. Eli answered each question gently, sharing stories about Maya's kindness, her laugh, her knack for seeing the good in everyone. He showed them old photos from college, told them about the time Maya pranked him by swapping his phone's language to Spanish so he had to figure out all the settings. They laughed at that, imagining her mischievous grin. Mrs. Clarice stayed in a guest suite, helping out when she could, though her health was declining. She loved seeing the children happy, free from the shadows of the past. Once in a while, she'd confide in Eli about her worries. What if something happened to her? Eli reassured her she'd always have a place in their home, in their family. Her eyes would mist with gratitude, and she'd pat his hand as if he were her own son. Time also softened Eli's grief over losing Maya. He still missed her deeply, but he felt her spirit in the children's laughter, in their resilience, in the small joys they discovered daily. He believed that by caring for them, he was honoring her legacy. The heartbreak he'd carried for 13 years felt less like a raw wound and more like a tender scar, a reminder of how love endures even in the face of loss. There were still challenges. Tantrums over bedtime, sibling squabbles, and the occasional meltdown over homework. But there was also joy. Game nights full of laughter, weekend barbecues with neighbors, spontaneous dance-offs in the living room, and quiet family moments that felt more precious than any business deal. One sunny Saturday, Eli was in the backyard, helping Luca and Mila set up a science experiment for school, while Levi practiced cartwheels on the lawn. The neighbor's dog barked in the distance, and the warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Suddenly, a stranger paused on the sidewalk, watching them through the fence. He eventually called out, "Excuse me, are those your kids?" Eli looked up, smiling. It was a moment that felt oddly symbolic, like life was testing him. He glanced back at the children, Luca wearing a confident grin as he taped wires together, Mila kneeling beside a makeshift volcano made of clay, Levi giggling as he tried another wobbly cartwheel. Then he looked at the curious stranger and said, without hesitation, "Yeah, they are." The stranger nodded with a friendly smile. "They look pretty awesome," he said. "They've got a good dad." Those words echoed in Eli's mind. A good dad. He never thought he'd hear that title. Yet here he was, father, protector, and friend to three amazing kids. He remembered the first time they called him Dad and how his heart nearly burst from happiness. He thought of Maya's letter, how she had trusted him to do what was right even though fear and regret could have kept him away. He silently thanked her for believing in him, for giving him the chance to become the man he was now. That evening, he and the kids decided to have a small memorial for Maya. They lit candles by her photo, laid fresh flowers, and each child said something they wished they could tell her. Luca thanked her for loving him enough to believe in a dad like Eli. Mila promised to keep drawing butterflies, only now they'd be full of hope instead of fear. Levi whispered a soft goodbye, hugging his lion tight. Eli spoke last, tears glistening in his eyes. He thanked Maya for teaching him how to love, for guiding him even in her absence, and for showing him that family isn't just about blood, it's about the bonds you choose to nurture. As the candles flickered, the children huddled close. Eli felt that indescribable warmth of belonging, of purpose, of a destiny fulfilled through love and resilience. So, that's the story of how Eli Winters, the self-made millionaire who once believed he'd lost his only shot at love, found three little strangers who called him Daddy. These kids weren't his by blood, but they were his by heart. A bond forged through Maya's unwavering faith and a twist of fate that brought them into his life. He had experienced heartbreak, betrayal by circumstance, and a sense of injustice that Maya had to suffer alone. Yet, in the end, there was also karma and redemption. The cruel man who once tormented Maya was left with nothing, and Eli, fueled by love and devotion, built a new life that honored her memory. He could have run away from responsibility, but he chose to step up, even though it scared him to his core. In doing so, he gained the family he never knew he needed. The children, once haunted by uncertainty, now flourished under his care, each discovering new passions and joys in the fresh Seattle air. Maya's spirit lived on in their laughter and in the tender moments they shared, reminding Eli every day that love can triumph over darkness if one has the courage to believe in it. And now, dear reader, what do you think of this journey? Please share your comments, lessons, and perspectives below. Your engagement means a lot, so go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share this story with friends who might need a reminder that hope and love can spring up in the most unexpected ways. The next time you wonder if someone you loved is really gone from your life, remember Maya's story. Sometimes what feels like an ending is just the start of a brand new chapter. Eli would never forget the day he knocked on that brownstone door and met three pairs of curious eyes. It was the moment he realized that the past might break your heart, but the future can mend it in ways you never imagined. As he tucked his children into bed each night, he carried Maya's memory like a soft, guiding light, ensuring that, in the end, love always found a way forward. And in that quiet triumph, there lay the sweetest form of justice, the final, powerful twist in a tale born from tears, but blossoming into hope.